What's your scary story? Mine was like this. For my 30th birthday, I decided to treat myself to a week of absolute solitude. I rented a small, modern house off a vacation rental site, located deep in the high desert of New Mexico, miles from the nearest town. The pictures showed a minimalist structure of glass and steel, a tiny speck of civilization amidst a vast, empty landscape of red rock and sagebrush. As a software developer from San Francisco, the idea of total silence and an unobstructed view of the stars was my idea of heaven. I packed my car with books, food, and a telescope, ready to completely disconnect. When I arrived, the place was even more stunning and isolated than I'd imagined. The silence was a physical presence, pressing in on me from all sides. The house was a glass box, with floor-to-ceiling windows making up 3 of the 4 walls, designed to immerse you in the stark beauty of the desert. The first few days were pure bliss. I hiked during the day and spent the night stargazing, feeling the stress of city life melt away. I felt completely, utterly alone, and I reveled in it. On the 4th evening, I was sitting on the couch reading a book as the sun began to set, painting the sky in fiery shades of orange and purple. I glanced up from my page, looking out at the vast expanse, and that's when I saw him. On a low mesa, about 100 yards from the house, a figure was standing perfectly still. It was just a silhouette against the vibrant sky, too far away to make out any details, but it was unmistakably the shape of a man. I assumed it was another hiker or a local, perhaps enjoying the same sunset I was. It was a little strange for someone to be standing so close to a private rental, but I shrugged it off. The desert was for everyone, after all. The next evening, I was making dinner and happened to look out the same window. He was there again. Same spot, same time, same motionless posture. This time, a prickle of unease ran down my spine. It was too much of a coincidence. I watched him for a solid 10 minutes, and he didn't move a muscle. He was just standing there, a dark statue against the dying light, and I had the unnerving feeling that he was looking directly at the house. I locked the doors, a gesture that felt both necessary and absurdly futile in a house made almost entirely of glass. I tried to reason with myself. Maybe it was a piece of strangely shaped rock or a tall yucca plant that my mind was anthropomorphizing in the twilight. But I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that it was a person. The following day, I was on edge. I spent the afternoon trying to convince myself I was being paranoid, a city dweller unused to the eccentricities of rural life. But as dusk began to settle, I found myself drawn to the window, my stomach in knots. And there he was, in the exact same spot. This time, I grabbed my binoculars. My hands were shaking so badly it took me a moment to focus. The figure was tall and thin, wearing what looked like dark, old-fashioned clothing. I couldn't make out a face. It was either in deep shadow or disturbingly featureless. He was absolutely still, a silent sentinel whose purpose I could begin to fathom. The feeling of being observed, of being the subject of this silent, unwavering scrutiny was suffocating. The beautiful, isolating house no longer felt like a sanctuary. It felt like a fishbowl, and I was the specimen on display. That night, sleep was impossible. Every gust of wind, every scrape of a branch against the glass sent a jolt of adrenaline through me. I felt exposed, vulnerable. The next morning, I decided I'd had enough. I couldn't spend another night being watched. I found the contact number for the property owner in the rental agreement and called him. I tried to sound casual, not wanting to come off as a hysterical tourist. "Hey, just a quick weird question. Do you have a neighbor who likes to watch the sunset from the mesa near the house? An older guy, stands really still." There was a long pause on the other end of the line, a silence so heavy it felt significant. When the owner finally spoke, his voice was low and strained, as if he was choosing his words very, very carefully. "You saw him too, huh? Listen to me. Don't try to get closer. Don't wave. Don't acknowledge him at all. Just keep the blinds closed after sunset. He's a fixture. Been there as long as anyone can remember." I asked him who he was, my voice barely a whisper. "Nobody knows. The old-timers say he's a guardian of the land. Some say he's the ghost of a prospector who lost his claim. All I know is that as long as you leave him alone, he leaves you alone. But he doesn't like being watched back." The line went dead. The casual confirmation of the paranormal, delivered with the weary tone of someone stating a mundane fact, was infinitely more terrifying than any dramatic ghost story. He wasn't a hiker. He wasn't a rock. He was something else.
After college, I landed a job in New Orleans and, to save money, moved into a cheap apartment in an old historic building in the Garden District. The place had character, which was realtor speak for sloping floors, drafty windows, and plumbing that groaned like a dying man. The building was a 3-story mansion converted into apartments, and I was on the second floor. The third floor, according to the landlord, was used for storage and was currently empty. I loved the high ceilings and the grand, if slightly decaying, atmosphere of the place. Being a pragmatist, I dismissed the city's reputation for being haunted. To me, creaks and groans were just signs of an old foundation, not restless spirits. For the first few months, my life was perfectly normal, filled with work, exploring the city, and slowly getting used to the constant humidity and the distant sound of jazz music that always seemed to hang in the air. The first strange occurrence was subtle, something I easily rationalized away. I'd be sitting in my living room at night and would hear what sounded like faint footsteps from the ceiling above me, the supposedly empty third floor. I chalked it up to squirrels or raccoons in the attic, a common problem in old Southern homes. Then I started hearing a soft, rhythmic thumping sound, like a small rubber ball being bounced gently and repeatedly in the same spot. It was always late at night, always from the same area directly over my bedroom. It was annoying, but I told myself it was just the old water pipes contracting and expanding with the temperature changes. I was determined to find a logical explanation for everything. I was a modern person living in the 21st century. Ghosts were the stuff of movies and campfire tales, not my second-floor apartment. One night, I was on a video call with my sister, who lives in Oregon. We were catching up, laughing about family drama, when she suddenly paused, a strange look on her face. "Hang on," she said. "Who's singing?" I muted my microphone and listened intently. For the first time, I could hear it clearly, no longer muffled by the ceiling. It was the faint, melodic sound of a woman humming a lullaby. It was a simple, old-fashioned tune, and it was undeniably coming from upstairs. "I have no idea," I told her, my heart starting to pound. "The apartment up there is supposed to be vacant. It must be a neighbor's TV or something." But the sound was too clear, too close. It didn't sound like it was coming from a speaker. It sounded live, intimate, and deeply sorrowful. The melody was hauntingly beautiful but filled with an ineffable sadness. My sister's face went pale. "What does it sound like?" she asked, her voice tense. I hummed the simple, looping melody back to her as best I could. An audible gasp came through my speakers. She looked as if she'd seen a ghost. "That's impossible, Jenna," she whispered. "That's Grandma's lullaby, the one she used to sing to us when we were little, the one her grandmother from Baton Rouge taught her." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. My grandmother had passed away 5 years prior, and our great-grandmother died decades before we were born. There was no way anyone else could know that specific, obscure family tune. It was never written down. It only existed in our memories. The humming from the third floor continued, a soft, heartbreaking melody that was now woven into the deepest parts of my own history. I felt a wave of icy terror wash over me, so potent it was hard to breathe. The rational explanations evaporated, leaving only a horrifying, inexplicable truth. The sounds from upstairs weren't raccoons or pipes. They were echoes of something else. My sister begged me to leave the apartment immediately, her voice frantic over the call. "I'm not kidding, Jenna. Get out of there right now." After we hung up, I sat in frozen silence, listening to the lullaby. It sounded closer now, as if the woman humming it was slowly walking across the floor above me, her voice a fragile thread of sound in the heavy silence of the old house. I could suddenly picture her, a grieving mother from a bygone era, forever piecing the floors of a nursery that no longer existed, humming a timeless song of love and loss to a child who was no longer there. I packed a bag with shaking hands, my eyes darting toward the ceiling at every creak. I didn't even turn off the lights. I practically ran out of the apartment and spent the night at a friend's place. The next day, I started looking for a new apartment. When I gave my landlord my notice, I casually asked about the history of the third floor. He looked uncomfortable, shifting his weight from foot to foot. "We don't like to talk about it. Long time ago, back in the 20s, there was a family up there. They lost their infant daughter to yellow fever. The mother, well, she was never the same. They say she stayed in that nursery humming to an empty cradle until the day she died." I just nodded. The cold dread returned with a vengeance. I never stepped foot in that building again. I had my friends retrieve my belongings for me. And even now, years later and miles away from New Orleans, I sometimes wake up in the middle of the night with that simple, sorrowful melody in my head. I went there as a skeptic, armed with logic and reason, and I left with the chilling knowledge that some connections defy explanation. A family song, a mother's grief had somehow seeped into the very walls of that building, echoing across a century to find someone who would understand its meaning. It was a lullaby meant for her child, but it became a haunting meant for me.
My family is from the deep, rolling hills of Appalachia in eastern Kentucky, a place where folklore and ghost stories are woven into the very fabric of the mountains. I, however, had long since traded those misty hollows for the concrete and logic of city life in Chicago. After my grandfather passed, the duty fell to me to go back and clear out his old house, a cabin he'd built with his own hands before it was sold. I brought my girlfriend Maya with me for support, though she was more unnerved by the lack of cell service than any local legends I jokingly told her about. The house was exactly as I remembered, smelling of old wood, pipe tobacco, and something earthy like the dirt floor of the cellar. It was a place frozen in time, and as I walked through its familiar, creaking rooms, I felt the nostalgic comfort, not a hint of fear. The superstitions of my youth felt a million miles away, childish fancies I had long outgrown. For me, it was just a house filled with memories, nothing more. We spent the first day sorting through dusty boxes, laughing at old photographs, and marveling at the sheer amount of junk a person can accumulate in a lifetime. As evening approached, a thick fog began to crawl down from the mountains, blanketing the cabin in a silent, gray embrace. We decided to call it a day and make dinner. I was in the kitchen, struggling with the ancient gas stove, while Maya was in the living room, looking through a stack of my grandpa's old vinyl records. The only light came from a few dim lamps we'd turned on, casting long, dancing shadows across the wood-paneled walls. The silence of the area was profound, broken only by the chirping of crickets and the soft crackle of the pilot light on the stove. It was peaceful, almost idyllic, and the farthest thing from my mind was the idea that we were not entirely alone in that isolated cabin, surrounded by miles of dark, whispering forest. Suddenly, Maya called out to me from the living room, her voice unusually quiet. "Hey, Alex, did you know one of the neighbors came by to visit?" I paused, confused. The nearest neighbor was over 2 miles down the winding dirt road, and it was nearly dark. "What are you talking about? No one's out there," I replied, my focus still on the stubborn stove. She walked to the doorway of the kitchen, her expression puzzled. "Don't be silly," she said, gesturing with her head towards the front of the house. "There's an old man sitting on the porch swing. I just saw him through the window. He was looking in. I figured he was a friend of your grandpa's, here to offer condolences." A cold, heavy feeling started to bloom in my chest, a primal sort of dread that I hadn't felt since I was a child, afraid of the dark. The porch swing had a distinctive, loud creak, and I hadn't heard a thing. I tried to laugh it off, a nervous, hollow sound that didn't convince either of us. "You're just seeing things, Maya. It's the fog playing tricks with the light. There's no one out there." I abandoned the stove and walked into the living room, peering through the very same window she had. Outside, the world was a swirl of gray mist. The porch was empty, the swing swaying ever so slightly in the damp breeze, but completely silent. "He was right there," she insisted, her voice now trembling. "He was wearing overalls and a faded red flannel shirt, holding one of those old-fashioned corncob pipes. He wasn't looking at me, more like through me, right at the fireplace." My blood ran cold. The description was unnervingly specific, and the fireplace was where my grandfather had always sat in his favorite armchair, the one I was now standing beside. "That's impossible," I whispered, my own skepticism starting to crumble under the weight of her conviction. "We would have heard a car or footsteps on the gravel. I was right here." We both stood there for a long moment, staring out into the oppressive twilight, listening to the silence of the mountains. The peaceful quiet no longer felt comforting. It felt watchful, heavy with unspoken secrets. I wanted to believe it was a trick of the light, a figment of her city-bred imagination, unused to the deep, dark quiet of the countryside. But the look on her face was one of pure, unadulterated shock, not confusion. She saw something, and her certainty was more terrifying than any shadow. The cabin, which had felt like a warm embrace of nostalgia just hours before, now felt like a tomb, a space that held more than just memories. We didn't sleep much that night, jumping at every creak of the old house settling. The next morning, while packing up a box of my grandfather's personal effects from his bedroom, I found what I was dreading I would find. It was a framed photograph taken on his 70th birthday that I had never seen before. There he was, sitting on that very same porch swing, beaming at the camera. He was wearing his favorite pair of denim overalls and a faded red flannel shirt, a corncob pipe held loosely in his hand. It was the exact image Maya had described, down to the chip on the side of the pipe's bowl. She had never met my grandfather, had never seen a picture of him outside of his military uniform, and certainly had never seen that specific shirt or pipe. She had described a dead man with perfect accuracy. We packed our car in a hurried silence and left that afternoon, not even bothering to finish the job. I hired someone locally to clear out the rest of the house. As I drove away, I didn't look back at the cabin, but I could feel its presence in the rearview mirror, a dark shape receding into the fog. I had gone back to that mountain to confront a past I thought I knew, one made of tangible memories and dusty objects. Instead, I was reminded that some places hold on to more than just memories. They hold on to echoes, to moments that refuse to fade. And sometimes, If you're unlucky, those echoes decide to look back at you, reminding you that the stories you dismissed as folklore are very, very real.